The Great Awakening, which was a religious awakening. Pilgrim versus Puritans. The Pilgrims just got up and left the Church of England. They were separatists. Separatists were a sect of Puritans within the movement who felt that the Church of England was too corrupt to save. Puritans, on the other hand, wanted to purify the false influences remaining from the Roman Catholic Church. At that time, the Church and state were one in England. The act of separating from the Church in England was considered treasonous. This is what prompted the separatists to leave England for Leyden, Holland in 1607. Leyden, Holland. To leave England at the time you needed permission from the king. Permission was forbidden for religious dissenters. The Pilgrims had to legally smuggle themselves out of England by bribing ship captains. In Leyden, Holland, Pilgrims had religious freedom. They found it difficult to retain their English identity in a Dutch country, but I don't think that was the main reason. I think it was more like there was a possibility of war between Holland and the Catholic-run Spain, which meant that they would be that practicing Protestantism was illegal again, and the 12-year truce Holland had with Spain was nearing an end, and also the male Pilgrims could be drafted into war. The Pilgrims didn't recognize or celebrate Christmas because they felt it was more of a pagan holiday than a Christian holiday, and they're probably right. Saints also rejected Easter and the various saints' holidays because they believed they had no scriptural basis. They also rejected hymns, so they did not sing, and the recitation of the Lord's Prayer and creeds. Psalms were the only music allowed in service. Sabbath services were held twice on Sunday from 9 to noon and from 2 to 5. Sermons were often given on Thursdays and on days of Thanksgiving or days of fasting. The seating arrangement of the Plymouth Meeting House was organized by gender, with the boys and men 16 and older sitting on one side and the women and children on the other. They often did not have an ordained minister, and they could not deliver the sacraments. Also, women could not speak at all in church. Not everyone aboard the Mayflower was a pilgrim. There were many others afterwards, too, and they were not Pilgrims or Puritans. They came for economic reasons, and this became a source of friction between the Pilgrims and the other people. Roger Williams. He was a Puritan minister, theologian, and author. He founded the Providence Plantations, which became the colony of Rhode Island. He was a staunch advocate for religious freedom. He believed in the separation of church and state. He believed to have he had fair dealings with American Indians. He was one of the first abolitionists. He was also governor of the colony in 1654 through 1658. He saw almost all of Providence burn during the King Philip's War in 1675 to 1676. And King Philip was Massasoit's son, whose name was Metacon. He saw Rhode Island rebuild. Another dissident was Anne Hutchinson. She was an early colonist of Massachusetts. She was banned from Boston in 1637 for her religious and feminist beliefs. She fled to the Rhode Island colony. Anne Hutchinson believed that an individual's intuition is a guide for achieving salvation. She felt the church adhered too closely to beliefs taught by ministers which placed salvation on one's deed. She thought salvation should be based on one's faith. Quakers. The first known Quakers in North America arrived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1656 via Barbados, and were soon joined by other Quaker preachers, who converted many of the colonists to Quakerism. For all the religious tolerance that they're supposed to have in America, the Pilgrims really weren't tolerant at all. The Quakers were also known as the Religious Society of Friends. The Christian movement was founded by George Fox in 1650 in England. He was devoted to peaceful principles. He believed everyone should be guided by an inner light. He rejected both formal ministry and all set forms of worship. And the Quaker women could speak in church, and you'll find later on in history that these women were very much involved in the women's vote issues. There was also going on in this time in Europe a thing called the Enlightenment. It's a European intellectual movement of the late 17th and 18th centuries, emphasizing reason and individualism rather than traditional religious teachings. A famous person during this time of enlightenment was Voltaire. He was a French Enlightenment writer, historian, and philosopher. He was famous for his wit, his criticism of Christianity, especially the Roman Catholic Church. He was an advocate of freedom in speech, freedom of religion, and separation of church and state. There was a big revivalism that started in the 1730s. One of the leaders was Jonathan Edwards. He was a Yale minister. He refused to convert to the Church of England. He was concerned that the New Englanders were becoming far too concerned with worldly matters, which is basically making money. He thought that people found the pursuit of wealth to be more important. Some were even beginning to suggest that predestination, which we'll talk about later, was wrong, and that good works might save a soul. This is one of his quotes. God was an angry judge, and humans were sinners. Another important leader of this period was George Whitefield. He was an Anglican priest, a powerful orator with charismatic appeal. He created a sensation in England by preaching outdoors and going over the heads of other priests to reach their congregations. And this was during the time of the Great Awakening. In 1740, he brought that same defiance of authority to America. It's an estimated 25,000 people gathered on Boston Commons to hear him speak. 2,000 heard him in Philadelphia, and 8,000 heard him in New York City. So it's like the old-fashioned revivals. Whitefield, in 15 months, as much of a quarter of the country in the U.S. had heard his message. Whitefield traveled 5,000 miles through America, teaching more than 250 times as he traversed the nation. He helped found the Methodist Church with these two gentlemen, John and Charles Wesley. John Wesley was considered to be the father of Methodism. John Wesley was his brother. He became one of the most prolific English-speaking poets, composing more than 6,500 hymns. Charles Wesley wrote, "Hark the herald angels sing, Christ the Lord is risen today, love divine, all love excelling." There was also another splinter Protestant group, and it was founded by John Calvin, and it was known as Calvinism. He was a French theologian and reformer. He was a leader in the Protestant Reformation, and he stressed the doctrine of predestination. He believed that God was, above all else, sovereign. He hated the way Catholicism had degenerated into a religion of salvation by works. You cannot manipulate God, nor put him in your debt. If you are saved, it is his doing, not your own. Predestination. He believed God alone knows who is elect or who is saved and who isn't. So even before you're born, you're either saved or you're not. A moral life shows that a person is probably one of the elect. He impressed on others the need to work out their salvation, not to be saved, but to show they are saved. Calvin believed that the emphasis on doing, on acting to transform a sinful world is what everyone should be trying to achieve. In emphasizing God's sovereignty, Calvin's institutions led the reader to believe that no person, king, bishop, or anyone else can demand our ultimate loyalty.